Climate change threatens the very survival of Africa's indigenous peoples. In East Africa, a radical drought blamed on climate change is battering nomadic pastoralists, forest hunters, and fisher people, and destroying the ecosystems on which they depend. In Kenya, wildlife and livestock are dying of thirst and hunger on an unprecedented scale, and an estimated 6.5 million Kenyans today face starvation. The Indigenous Peoples of Africa Coordinating Committee asked our crew to check out how indigenous communities are coping on the ground in remote parts of Kenya. In northern Kenya, Samburu chief George Lemarketo walked us through his devastated territories.
It's dying because of the drought. There's no grass, nothing to eat, no water. We don't have any other bank account. These are our bank accounts. If a cow dies, then you definitely know that you have lost part of your life. And now we have problem. It's about 40 years we have never seen something like this one. And cows are fighting in survival. They don't have even leaves or pods of any tree. All trees are drying up. Maybe it's part of the global warming.
The African Commission on Human and People's Rights recognizes forest-based hunter-gatherers, traditional fisher people, and nomadic pastoralists as indigenous peoples in Africa. These cultures are deeply vulnerable to climate change because they depend on natural resources for food, medicine, and grazing, and don't have the security of land tenure to use as collateral when drought kills their livestock. But African indigenous cultures are also treasure houses of ecological knowledge, and indigenous peoples know a great deal about adaptation and conservation. African indigenous delegates met at an IPAC climate change workshop in Kenya to strategize their responses to global warming. They discussed RED, the UN program on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. RED focuses on carbon credit trading, whereby the industrialized nations responsible for global warming pay developing countries to conserve their forest biodiversity.
Climate change basically involves adaptation and mitigation. It's very important for people, indigenous communities, to meet and brainstorm on how to develop effective and achievable mitigation and adaptation practices or targets.
RED will help us to control the community will have access to control the environment. But we want this one to go to extend it to a grassroots whereby the community will learn for themselves also.
We want to tell the world that without rights there should be no RED. Things like land ownership must be very clear there. Who will own the carbon? Who will own the trees that store that carbon? But we are encouraged with what is happening through the UN RED process and through the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility process. At least we see an effort being made to bring communities into the program.
We want to lead Kenyans in conserving the environment, so that in the next few years the government will entrust forest to communities.
Kimayo took us to the Ogiek's ancestral territory, which lies in the Mao Forest watershed in Kenya's Central Highlands. The Ogiek were hunter-gatherers and honey collectors until their land rights were stripped away by colonial and post-colonial governments. Successive governments granted farming rights to outside communities and vast logging concessions to a handful of companies. Timber companies and immigrant farmers logged out indigenous forests, which eventually dried up this key wetland in the heart of the Mao. This wetland is the source of 7 major rivers, and its destruction caused severe problems downstream.
Mao was the largest indigenous forest in Eastern Africa. Now what has affected Mao, the climate change which has affected Mao, has affected a population of almost 15 million Kenyans who are now having failed crops. The livestock are not getting enough food. We have now diseases coming up. And of course, all manner of conflicts that is being created by the competing of natural resources. 3 companies have been logging our forests. They are owned by people in the government. We feel betrayed. We actually feel targeted for our own conservation skills and for resisting the assimilation process which was started by the colonial authorities and perpetuated by the present regimes. If RED is a process that goes directly to the Ogiek community, then it will benefit the Ogiek. What those pushing RED should actually do, let them negotiate with the communities who have conservation interests, but not governments who have short-term plans, a vision of 5-year survival. Because regimes will change and money will be stolen, but the Ogiek are ready to conserve Mao free of charge. They'll offer their own skills free of charge.
Like the Ogiek, the Yaku of central Kenya were also forest hunter-gatherers. They lived in sacred ancestral caves in the Mukogodo forest. But commercial loggers, Maasai pastoralists, and Turkana charcoal burners moved into the Mukogodo and cleared vast tracts of forest. The Yaku were dispossessed and traditional hunting was outlawed. Today, the Yaku eke out an existence on the edge of their remaining ancestral forest home.
Inatata peye mekure tanaba tokiting nati na kaye une yolo ko poki ajokore basi
mera gangara ya to lami e nyala na di mamuno di to ngana bo ken ata mena dana tiana ti ore na ba mulugo megure gya ta mugebe jo shida ta le lorki ne mota.
Where we were getting the food from the forest, the flowers, the honey, and what have you in the forest, we are not getting anymore because the drought has come and every life has changed. So that's why we are getting the hardship, especially.
Na gukore data na tim keda ngatini na doling amu anada madal dongani ta to dungol chani
na nigin to ka pe shugunyen timanga na pake nege to nya na pake nya ore sintai na obo no ayune yo lo wele ti abar mo kodo entare te na yo ni yo lo yo ga da to na ngiti me ata de ga ni kibu atwa na timanga ge giti na anta obo no ngoru ki ma sa yo mo kodo
anta saru yo kam ga gira awuriyo kanati ni nyoro na sho yo kamo ora natim na egitu tenita in yo natim anna ushilo shi samaki liwa buda tu ankare ni nanga gende weji
kware to pe ta bakini serikali ya Kenya ta ata na katar ku akle yaku ne sholope ne ake shukunyi teneningu tene ya nyitu lope nyita ata na katai lokwa.